right now, as you're watching this. Something impossible is happening. Your thoughts, immaterial, weightless, invisible, are controlling your body. You're deciding to keep watching, to blink, to breathe deeper. An idea is moving matter. But here's the problem that's haunted humanity for millennia. How? How does something that has no physical substance control something that does? How does a thought which you can't touch, can't measure, can't put under a microscope make your finger move? In the 13th century, a Dominican monk was given an ultimatum: prove the soul exists using reason alone, or be branded a heretic. Not faith, not scripture, pure logic. His name was Thomas Aquinas, and he did it. But his answer was so radical, so perfectly balanced between faith and science, that it threatened everything. The church condemned his works. His enemies wanted him silenced. Both sides thought he'd gone too far. Because Aquinas didn't just prove the soul exists. He revealed something far more disturbing. What it actually is, how it works, and why it needs your body more than you ever imagined. This is the story of the soul paradox, the deepest mystery of human existence. And by the end of this journey, you'll understand why this medieval monk's answer still haunts modern neuroscience, why his ideas were too dangerous for his own time, and what he saw in his final days that made him stop writing forever. Let's go back to where it all began. Paris, 1245. The University of Paris is the intellectual center of the Christian world. Scholars from across Europe crowd into lecture halls, debating, arguing, occasionally throwing punches over philosophical points. It's electric, it's dangerous, and it's about to explode, because something new has arrived in Europe. Something that threatens to unravel everything the church has built over 1,000 years. Books, not just any books. The complete works of Aristotle, translated from Arabic, smuggled through Spain and Sicily, carrying with them centuries of Islamic commentary. And these books pose a question that no Christian theologian has been able to answer satisfactorily. What is the human soul? You have to understand this isn't an abstract academic debate. This is existential. This is personal. If you get the nature of the soul wrong, you get everything wrong. Morality collapses. Free will disappears. The resurrection becomes impossible. Heaven and hell lose their meaning. And in 1245, Christianity is facing an intellectual crisis that could destroy it from within. The problem is this: the soul paradox. Here's what the church inherited from its philosophical ancestors. First, there's Plato. Beautiful, poetic, mystical Plato. According to him, eutherial, you are a pure, immaterial soul temporarily trapped in a physical body. Your body is a prison, a tomb. The soul is perfect, eternal, and doesn't belong here. It's just passing through. This sounds spiritual. It sounds religious. It fits nicely with the idea of an afterlife, right? The soul escapes the body at death and flies off to heaven. But there's a fatal problem. If the soul is completely separate from the body, if it's just a ghost using meat as a vehicle, then how do they interact? How does an immaterial thought cause a material muscle to contract? How does physical food get converted into mental energy for thinking? Plato never answered this. He just gestured vaguely at participation and moved on. Not good enough. Then there's Aristotle. Aristotle looks at the same problem and says, "You're all thinking about this wrong." According to him, the soul isn't some foreign entity trapped in flesh. The soul is the form of the body. It's the organizing principle that makes a living thing alive. A rock has no soul, it's just matter. A plant has a vegetative soul that grows, it reproduces. An animal has a sensitive soul that perceives, it feels, it moves. And humans, we have a rational soul. The power to think abstractly, to reason, to understand universal truths. This is elegant. This makes sense. The soul and body aren't two separate things, awkwardly stapled together, they're one, unified substance. But now we have the opposite problem. If the soul is just the form of the body, if it's nothing more than the organization of matter, then what happens when the body dies? Does the soul die too? Is it even immortal? Aristotle himself was vague on this point. Some of his passages suggest the intellect might survive. Others suggest it doesn't. He left it ambiguous, frustratingly ambiguous. And then the Islamic philosophers entered the conversation, especially one man, Avros, the great commentator. Ibn Rushd to the Islamic world, Avros to the Latin West. Brilliant, uncompromising, and absolutely convinced that Aristotle was right about everything. Avros reads Aristotle and concludes something shocking. The individual human soul doesn't exist. Wait, what? According to Avros, there's one single universal intellect, like a cosmic mind, and all humans are just temporarily connected to it. When you think, you're not really thinking. You're tapping into the one shared intellect. When you die, your individual consciousness doesn't continue. It just ... disconnects, like logging off a server. This is philosophically clean. It solves Aristotle's ambiguity, but it also obliterates personal immortality, individual responsibility, and everything Christianity is built on. You're not a person. You're a temporary node in a network. Imagine trying to explain sin, judgment, resurrection, and eternal life. If that's true, you can't. The whole system collapses. And yet Avros' interpretation is spreading through Europe like wildfire. Students in Paris are reading his commentaries. They're nodding along. Some of them are starting to agree. The church is panicking. Meanwhile, the church fathers themselves can't agree on the right answer. Augustine, the towering giant of Christian theology, lines heavily Platonic. He believes the soul is a spiritual substance, distinct from the body, capable of existing independently. He's uncomfortable with Aristotle's biological approach, too materialistic, too cold. But other theologians see the problem with Augustine's approach. If the soul is totally separate, how does it unite with the body? How do you explain the resurrection of the body at the end of time? Why would a pure spiritual soul want a body back? Some theologians try to split the difference. Maybe the soul is spiritual and biological. Maybe humans have two souls, one mortal, one immortal. Maybe the body is a necessary evil that the soul transcends at death. But none of these solutions work. They all create new problems. They all leave gaping logical holes. And underneath all these academic debates, there's a darker tension brewing. Because the stakes are not just theological, they're political. The University of Paris isn't just a school. It's a battleground. The Dominican order, the order of preachers, The intellectual shock troops of the Church are fighting for orthodoxy against what they see as creeping heresy. On the other side, the Faculty of Arts to Philosophy department is pushing for intellectual freedom. They want to follow reason wherever it leads, even if it contradicts church teaching. They're reading Aristotle without apology. They're taking Averroes seriously. The Bishop of Paris is watching. The Pope is watching. Inquisitors are taking notes. This isn't a friendly academic debate. Careers are being destroyed. Books are being burned. Men are being silenced, exiled. Or worse, and into this absolute intellectual war zone walks a young Italian monk with a stutter and a telly, and a reputation for being slow. His name is Thomas Aquinas. Aquinas at first glance, Thomas Aquinas, doesn't look like a revolutionary. His massive contemporaries describe him as a big, silent ox. He's quiet in debates, slow to speak, methodical. While other students are shouting arguments and scoring rhetorical points, Thomas sits in the back, thinking. His teacher, Albertus Magnus Albert the Great, sees something in him that others don't. Albert defends him when other students mock his silence. Albert gives him access to the forbidden texts, the controversial commentaries, the dangerous ideas, and Thomas absorbs everything. He reads Plato, he reads Augustine, he reads Aristotle, he reads Avicenna, Al-Ghazali, Maimonides. He reads the Church Fathers, the Greek commentators, the Islamic and Jewish philosophers who've been wrestling with these questions for centuries. And slowly, methodically, he starts to see the pattern. Everyone is making the same mistake. They're treating the soul and body as two separate things that somehow have to be connected. Plato puts them in opposition. Aristotle unites them but can't explain their separation. Averroes dissolves individuality to save unity. But Thomas starts to wonder, what if the question itself is wrong? What if the soul isn't a thing inside the body? What if it's not a ghost in a machine, not a form imposed on matter, not a universal intellect temporarily downloaded into flesh? What if it's something else entirely? But here's the problem Thomas faces. Whatever answer he comes up with, it has to satisfy everyone and no one. It has to be Catholic enough for the Church. It has to preserve the immortality of the soul, individual judgment, the resurrection, and eternal life. It has to be philosophical enough for the Faculty of Arts. It has to use reason, not just revelation. It has to engage with Aristotle honestly, not just dismiss him because he's pagan. It has to be biologically accurate. It has to explain how living things work, how perception functions, how the body and soul actually interact in the messy reality of being human. And it has to avoid the heresies that are getting people condemned. Materialism, dualism, avarism, determinism. That's an impossible tightrope. And Thomas knows it. But he also knows that if someone doesn't solve this, if Christianity can't answer the soul paradox with both reason and faith, then Averroes wins. Philosophy and theology split. Forever. The Church loses the intellectual class. And the greatest question of human existence remains unanswered. So he begins. Slowly, methodically, carefully, he starts to build an answer that will change everything. But first, he needs to understand what everyone got wrong, and that means going deeper into the battlefield of ideas. That means studying with the one man in Europe who wasn't afraid to touch the forbidden texts, Albertus Magnus, The teacher who will give Thomas the tools to think the unthinkable, because before Thomas can build his solution, he needs to understand exactly why every other solution fails. And that education, it's about to get dangerous. 1252. Cologne, Germany. Thomas Aquinas has been sent away from Paris, not as punishment, as preparation. His superiors in the Dominican order have assigned him to study under one man, Albertus Magnus. Albert the Great, the most controversial, brilliant, and dangerous scholar in all of Christianity. And Albert has a reputation. He's the man who actually reads Aristotle of him, not just the safe parts. He's the scholar who treats Islamic and Jewish philosophers not as enemies to be refuted, but as colleagues to be understood. He dissects animals to understand biology. He studies minerals and plants with obsessive detail. He's trying to build a complete picture of the natural world, using observation and reason. The church tolerates him, barely, because Albert has protection. He's a bishop. He's respected. He's too prominent to silence easily. But everyone knows. He's walking a razor's edge. One wrong move, one statement too far, and even he could fall. And now Thomas, this quiet, massive, methodical young monk, is his student. Albert sees something in Thomas that others don't, while other students mock Thomas for his silence, calling him the dumb ox. Albert defends him publicly. There's a famous poem, probably legendary, but revealing nonetheless, where Albert says to the other students, "You call him a dumb ox, but I tell you, this ox will bellow so loud that his voice will echo throughout the world." Albert recognizes what Thomas is doing. He's not slow, he's thorough. He's not silent because he has nothing to say. He's silent because he's listening, absorbing, connecting ideas that no one else is connecting. And Albert is about to give Thomas the most dangerous education in medieval Europe. The first lesson: how to read Aristotle without losing your soul. See, Aristotle wasn't a Christian. He didn't know anything about revelation, scripture, the Trinity, original sin, or eternal damnation. He was a pagan Greek philosopher trying to understand the natural world through observation and logic alone, and he was good at it. Aristotle's physics, his biology, his psychology, they were more sophisticated, more empirical, more systematic than anything Christian Europe had produced in centuries. When his works flooded back into the West through Arabic translations, it was like discovering an advanced alien civilization. But here's the problem. Some of what Aristotle said contradicted church teaching. He said the universe was eternal, no beginning, no creation moment. The church said God created everything from nothing at a specific point in time. He was vague about whether individual souls survived death. The church insisted on personal immortality and resurrection. He suggested everything in nature operated by necessity, by deterministic laws. The church needed free will, moral choice, divine intervention. So the easy, safe response was to ban him, condemn him, burn the books. And that's exactly what the Bishop of Paris kept trying to do. But Albert took a different approach, a dangerous approach. He said, what if Aristotle is mostly right, and we just need to correct him where he's wrong? What if you could use Aristotle's method, his rigorous logic, his attention to natural phenomena, while still maintaining Christian truth? What if faith and reason weren't enemies? This is what Thomas learns from Albert. Intellectual courage, not the courage to rebel against the Church. Thomas is deeply, genuinely Catholic. He believes in the sacraments, the magisterium, the necessity of grace. He's a Dominican friar. His whole life is devoted to defending orthodoxy. But Albert teaches him a different kind of courage. The courage to follow an argument wherever it leads, even if it's uncomfortable. Even if it challenges your assumptions. Even if it looks dangerous from the outside. Because truth can't contradict truth. If something is genuinely true philosophically, and something is genuinely true theologically, they can't ultimately conflict. They might look like they conflict because you're misunderstanding one of them, but reality is unified. Truth is one. This becomes Thomas' guiding principle for the rest of his life, and it's about to get him into enormous trouble. The second lesson: how to read the Islamic philosophers without becoming one. Albert doesn't just teach Aristotle. He teaches the Arabic commentators, the Muslim and Jewish scholars, who'd been wrestling with Aristotle for centuries before the Christians even knew who he was. Avicen and Al-Farabi, Avros, Maimonides, these men had already asked every question Thomas is asking. They'd already encountered every problem, and they'd come up with sophisticated, brilliant answers. Some of those answers were unacceptable to Christianity, but you couldn't just dismiss them. You had to engage with them. You had to understand why they thought what they thought. And one philosopher in particular becomes Thomas's obsession: Avros. Avros is the final boss of medieval philosophy. If Thomas is going to solve the soul paradox, he has to defeat Avros. Not by dismissing him, not by calling him a heretic, by actually refuting his arguments on philosophical grounds. Because Avros' position is dangerously coherent. Remember, Avros says there's only one intellect for all humanity. When you think, you're not really generating your own thoughts. You're tapping into a universal mind that exists beyond any individual. Human. Why does he think this? Because of a problem with Aristotle's psychology. Aristotle says that thinking about universal's abstract concepts like triangle, justice, beauty, requires an immaterial intellect. You can't think about triangle in general with a material brain, because your brain is particular, physical, stuck in space and time. But the concept of triangle is universal, abstract, timeless. So the intellect that grasps universals must itself be universal, abstract, timeless. But if that's true, if they see, the world seems to pause, but the concept of triangle is universal, abstract, timeless. So the intellect that grasps universals must ergo subversals, must itself be universal, abstract, timeless. But if that's true, if it's been decided like it is siloed, the intellect is immaterial and universal, then it can't belong to any individual human. It can't be your intellect or my intellect. It has to be the intellect.one mind, shared by everyone. And when your body dies, the universal intellect continues. But you don't. Your individual personality, your memories, your identity, those were just temporary configurations in matter. They dissolve. This is philosophically elegant and spiritually horrifying. Thomas studies Avros' arguments obsessively. He reads them in Latin translation. He works through the logic step by step. And he realizes Averroes isn't stupid. He's not making obvious errors. He's following Aristotle's principles to their logical conclusion. If you want to defeat him, you can't just assert Christian doctrine. You have to find the flaw in the reasoning itself. You have to show where Averroes misread Aristotle or made a hidden assumption that doesn't hold up. And slowly, methodically, Thomas starts to see it. The flaw isn't obvious. It's buried deep in the metaphysics of form and matter. It has to do with how individuality works, how the soul relates to the body, what it means for something immaterial to be this particular thing rather than a universal principle. Thomas is onto something, but he needs to understand the problem from every angle before he can solve it. He needs to go deeper into the weeds of Aristotelian psychology. He needs to understand how sensation works, how imagination works, how the intellect abstracts universals from particular experiences. And that means learning the third lesson, how the mind actually works. This is where Albert's approach becomes radical. Most theologians in the 13th century are speculative. They sit in their studies and think about abstract principles. They deduce things from first principles and sacred texts. Albert doesn't do that. Albert dissects. He observes. He experiments. He wants to know, how do eyes actually work? How does the image of a tree get from outside your head to inside your awareness? What's the mechanism? He studies optics. He studies anatomy. He reads Arabic medical texts that describe the structure of the brain. And he teaches Thomas to think like a scientist before the word scientist exists. Because if you're going to explain how an immaterial soul interacts with a material body, you need to understand how the body actually works. You can't just wave your hands and say the soul does it. You need a mechanism. You need to show the gears turning. Thomas absorbs this. He starts thinking about sensation not as some mystical process, but as a physical and mental event that has to be explained in detail. When you see a red apple, here's what happens. Light bounces off the apple and enters your eye. The physical structure of your eye receives that light. That's a material process. But somewhere in that process, you don't just physically register the light. You become aware of redness, of appleness, of a particular object. Where does the transition happen? Where does the physical become mental? That's the question. That's the heart of the soul paradox. And Thomas is starting to formulate an answer. An answer that no one has articulated clearly before. But the more Thomas learns, the more dangerous his position becomes. Because he's trying to do something that seems impossible. Synthesize Aristotle and Christianity without compromising either. 1. The conservatives in the church don't trust him. They see him reading Aristotle, engaging seriously with Averroes, citing Islamic philosophers. And they think he's going to lead people into heresy, the radical philosophers in the faculty of ours don't trust him either. They see him defending the immortality of the soul, insisting on free will, maintaining church doctrine, and they think he's just another theologian trying to restrict philosophy. Both sides are watching him. Both sides think he's on a path that leads to condemnation. And maybe they're right, because Thomas has decided something. He's made a choice that will define the rest of his career. He's not going to compromise. He's not going to pick a side and ignore the other. He's going to follow the logic wherever it goes, defend truth wherever he finds it, and trust that if he's rigorous enough, if he's careful enough, the contradictions will resolve. Faith and reason will harmonize. They have to, because both come from God. 1256. Thomas returns to Paris. He's no longer a student. He's now a master of theology, a professor. At only 31 years old, he's given his own chair at the University of Paris, and he's ready to present his solution to the soul paradox. But Paris has changed. The controversy has intensified. The Faculty of Arts is now openly teaching avorism, the doctrine of one universal intellect. Students are saying that philosophy proves one thing, and faith says another, and both can be true in different realms. This is called double truth, and it's a disaster. Because if philosophy contradicts faith, and both are valid, then either reason is unreliable or revelation is false. You can't have it both ways. One of them has to yield. The Bishop of Paris is preparing condemnations. The Dominicans are preparing counterattacks. The whole university is about to explode into open warfare, and Thomas walks into the center of it with a claim that sounds insane. I can prove the soul is immaterial and individual using Aristotle's own principles. I can defeat Avros without abandoning reason. And I can show exactly how an immaterial soul unites with a material body. His colleagues think he's arrogant. His enemies think he's deluded. But Thomas has been preparing for this his entire academic life. He's studied every argument. He's traced every logical pathway. He's identified the hidden assumptions in Avros' reasoning and the mistakes in Augustine's metaphysics. And he's found something no one else has seen. A third way. A solution that preserves both Aristotelian science and Christian theology. But to explain it, he has to rebuild the entire theory of the soul from the ground up. He has to start with the most basic question. What does it mean to be alive? What separates a living thing from a dead thing? And his answer to that question, his redefinition of what the soul actually is about to change philosophy forever. But first, there's something you need to understand. Thomas isn't just an academic. He's not sitting in an ivory tower playing intellectual games. He believes this matters. He believes the soul paradox is the most important question a human being can ask. Because if you get the nature of the soul wrong, you misunderstand what you are. You misunderstand your purpose, your dignity, your destiny. Are you just meat that will rot? Are you a ghost that doesn't belong here? Are you a temporary node in a universal network? Or are you something else, something unified, something embodied, something both material and transcendent? Thomas believes he knows the answer, and he's about to tell the world, even if it destroys him. Picture a corpse, not in a morbid way, in a philosophical way. Picture a human body, freshly dead. Maybe it died just moments ago, peacefully, in sleep. Here's the question, is that still a person? Most people would say no. That's not your grandfather anymore. That's your grandfather's body. The person is gone. What remains is just ... matter, meat, organic material that will begin decomposing according to the laws of chemistry. But here's the disturbing follow-up question. What changed? The body has the same atoms it had 5 minutes ago when it was alive. The same carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, the same molecular structures, the same DNA. Physically, at the moment of death, almost nothing has changed. And yet everything has changed. The difference between a living human and a corpse is the presence or absence of one thing, the soul, and that fact, that undeniable, observable fact is where Thomas Aquinas starts his revolution. Thomas asks, what does the soul actually do? Not in some mystical, vague sense. Not it's the spiritual part of you, or it's the image of God, or it's your connection to the divine. Those might be true, but they don't explain anything. What does the soul do? What's its function? What observable difference does it make? And here's his answer, shocking in its simplicity. The soul makes you alive. That's it. That's the core function. The soul is the principle of life. It's what organizes matter into a living being. It's what makes the difference between a corpse and a person. But now Thomas goes further. And this is where it gets radical. The soul isn't a separate thing inside your body, like a ghost piloting a machine. The soul doesn't inhabit your body the way you might inhabit a house. The soul is your body, or more precisely, the soul is the form of your body. And if you don't understand what that means, you don't understand Thomas' revolution. We need to talk about form and matter. This is Aristotle's metaphysics, but Thomas is about to use it in a way Aristotle never quite articulated. Everything in the physical world is made of two principles, matter and form. Matter is the raw material, the stuff something is made of. Form is the organizing principle, the structure, the pattern, the whatness that makes that matter into a specific kind of thing. Take a bronze statue of a horse. The bronze is the matter. The horse shape is the form. The bronze could have been shaped into 1,000 different things, a sword, a cup, a human figure. The form is what makes it this thing instead of something else. Now here's the key. Matter never exists without some form. There's no such thing as pure, formless matter, just floating around. And form never exists without being the form of something material. You can't have horse shape without it being the shape of bronze or marble or clay or pixels on a screen. Matter and form are inseparable in reality. You can distinguish them in thought, but you can't pull them apart in the world. Still with me? Because this is about to explain everything, Thomas says. The soul is the form of the body, not a thing inside the body, not a separate substance temporarily glued to flesh. The soul is the organizing principle that makes your matter into you. Your body without your soul isn't your body, it's a corpse. The matter is still there, but the form is gone. The organization that made that matter alive, human, you, has ceased. Think about it. When you eat food, that food becomes part of you. The molecules get broken down and rebuilt into your cells, your tissues, your organs. The matter changes constantly, not made of the same atoms you were 10 years ago. But you remain the same person. Why? Because the form persists. The soul continues to organize the matter, even as the matter itself is constantly being replaced. The soul is what makes your body, and this solves so many problems at once that it's almost dizzying. First problem solved. Unity. Plato's dualism makes you into two things, awkwardly connected, a ghost and a machine. But if the soul is the form of the body, you're not two things. You're one thing, a living, ensouled body, a human being. You don't have a soul and have a body the way you have a car and have a garage. You are an embodied soul. The soul and body are as inseparable as the shape of the statue is from the bronze. This is elegant. This makes sense of our experience. When you stub your toe, you feel pain, not your body, while you observe from a distance. When you think about philosophy, you are thinking not some ghost using your brain as a tool. You're unified. One substance. One being. Second problem solved. Life. Why are living things different from non-living things? Because living things have souls. A rock doesn't grow, doesn't reproduce, doesn't maintain itself. It just sits there obeying the laws of physics, passively. It has no soul, it's just matter, with a very simple form, the form of rock. A plant. Has a vegetative soul the power to take in nutrition, grow, and reproduce? That's what makes it alive instead of just a chemical process. An animal has a sensitive soul, everything the plant has, plus sensation, emotion, locomotion, memory. That's what makes it more than just a self-replicating chemical system. And humans. We have a rational, soul, everything animals have, plus the power of abstract thought, universal reasoning, self-reflection. The soul is what makes each level of being what it is. It's not some extra thing added on. It's the very principle of organization that makes life possible. But here's where Thomas drops the bomb that makes everyone uncomfortable. If the soul is the form of the body, if it's the organizing principle of your matter, then the soul and body aren't just accidentally related. They need each other. The soul isn't complete without the body. The body isn't a prison the soul longs to escape. The body is the natural expression of the soul, and this has a shocking implication. The soul without the body is in an unnatural state. Wait. What? Think about it. If the form of bronze is horse shape, you can't have horse shape floating around without any bronze. The form needs matter to be actualized. The shape needs something to be the shape of. In the same way, the human soulage is the form of a human body, naturally exists in union with a body. Separated from the body at death, the soul continues to exist, and Thomas will prove why in a moment, but it's incomplete. It's like the echo of a song without the music. This is why the resurrection isn't optional in Christian theologies. Necessary. Humans aren't meant to be disembodied souls floating in heaven. We're meant to be embodied, soul and body together, as we were designed to be. And this is where the church authorities start getting nervous, because Thomas sounds like he's saying the soul is too dependent on the body. If the soul needs the body, how is it immortal? If the soul without the body is incomplete, what happens? In the intermediate state between death and resurrection, the traditional Platonic picture was comfortable. The soul is pure spirit, doesn't really need the body, is actually better off without it, flies away to heaven completely fulfilled. But Thomas is saying, no, the soul needs the body to be fully human. Separation is a tragedy, a rupture, an unnatural state that cries out for healing. This sounds materialistic. This sounds like he's compromising the transcendence of the soul. His critics are circling. The whispers are starting. Is Aquinas denying the independence of the soul? Is he making it too biological? Is he reading too much Aristotle and not enough Augustine? But Thomas isn't backing down, because he has an answer to their objection. An answer that will prove the soul is both form of the body and capable of existing without it. And that answer has to do with thinking. Here's the argument that changes everything. Thomas observes something about human thought. When you think about abstract concepts, You're doing something that transcends the physical. When you think about triangle, you're not thinking about any particular triangle. Not the one on the page, not the one in your imagination with specific angles and size. You're thinking about triangle in general, triangle and such, the universal concept that applies to all possible triangles. But here's the problem. Nothing physical is universal. Everything material is particular, specific, located in space and time. Your brain is particular. The neurons firing are particular. The chemicals interacting are particular. So how can a particular material brain grasp a universal, immaterial concept? It can't. Not by itself. There must be something in you that's capable of operating beyond the material. Something that can abstract from particular instances to universal truths. Something that can think about infinity, eternity, justice. Being dash as dash, such dot. And that something is the intellect. The rational soul. This is Thomas's proof of immateriality. The soul, specifically the rational. Part of the soul must be immaterial because it performs immaterial operations. It grasps universals. It thinks about abstract truths that have no physical instantiation. When you do mathematics, you're not just shuffling symbols on paper. You're grasping necessary truths that would be true even if the physical universe didn't exist. 2 + 2 = 4, not because of any physical fact, but because of the logical structure of number itself. Your brain helps you think, provides images, memories, sensory data, but the actual act of understanding, the intellectual grasp of universal truth transcends the brain. This is why the soul can survive the death of the body. Because the rational soul has an Operacean thinking that doesn't depend entirely on matter. It uses matter, it works through matter, but it's not reducible to matter. The soul is the form of the body fully embedded in materiality, organizing and animating flesh. But the soul also transcends the body, capable of operations that go beyond any physical process, both simultaneously, paradoxically, and this is why Thomas' solution is so brilliant and so dangerous. He's navigating between two heresies. On one side, materialism, the idea that we're just complicated meat, that consciousness is just brain states, that death is annihilation. This denies the immortality of the soul and makes resurrection pointless. On the other side, extreme dualism, the idea that we're ghosts trapped in flesh, that the body is a prison, that we'd be better off without it. This denies the goodness of material creation and makes the incarnation meaningless. Thomas threads the needle. The soul is fully embodied, not trapped in flesh, but expressed through it. And the soul is fully transcendent, capable of operations that go beyond any physical mechanism. We are neither angels nor animals, with something in between, something unique. We are rational animals, embodied spirits, material beings capable of immaterial thought. We stand on the boundary between two worlds. But now we need to get practical, because Thomas hasn't just given us a philosophical theory. He's given us a framework for understanding how the mind actually works. If the soul is the form of the body, then mental operations aren't separate from physical operations. They're united, interwoven, dependent on each other in complex ways. When you see a tree, that's not just your soul perceiving something immaterial. It's your eyes receiving light, your brain processing information. and your intellect abstracting the concept tree from the sensory data. When you remember something, that's not just your immaterial soul accessing a purely spiritual library. It's your brain storing physical traces, your imagination reconstructing images, and your intellect organizing meaning. The soul doesn't work alone. It works through the body. It needs the body. It's expressed in every physical process. And this means Thomas needs to explain, in detail, how sensation works, how imagination works, how memory bridges the gap between sense and intellect. He needs to show the mechanism, the gears turning, the precise way that material sensations become immaterial thoughts. And that's exactly what he's about to do. But before he can explain the mechanism, he needs to address a challenge, because there's one more problem lurking in his theory. One more objection that his enemies are preparing to throw at him. If the soul is the form of the body, if they're that unified, then why do different people have different souls? You and I both have human bodies. We're both organized by human souls. So why aren't we the same person? What makes your soul different from my soul if souls are just the form of human matter? And if you can't answer that question, if you can't explain individuality, then you've just agreed with Evros that there's only one universal soul for all humanity. You've walked right into the trap. Thomas knows this objection is coming, and he has an answer, but it's complicated. It requires understanding how form and matter relate to individuality. It requires a deep dive into the metaphysics of personhood, and it's the key to everything else he's going to argue. Because if Thomas can prove that individual human souls exist, that you are genuinely, irreducibly you, not just a temporary configuration of universal intellect, then he's defeated Evros. At the deepest level, he's proven that persons matter, that individuality is real, that your life, your thoughts, your choices are genuinely yours. And that means your destiny is yours too, your responsibility, your eternity. Everything hangs on this. You are three things at once. Right now, as you watch this, your body is doing something miraculous. Your heart is pumping blood. Your lungs are extracting oxygen. Your cells are converting glucose into energy. Your digestive system is breaking down your last meal. Your immune system is fighting off pathogens you don't even know exist. You're not consciously doing any of this. You're not thinking your heart into beating. You're not willing your cells to metabolize. It's happening automatically, beneath awareness. That's the first you, the vegetative you, the part of your soul that keeps you alive. But you're also doing something else. You're seeing colors on a screen. You're hearing a voice. Maybe you're feeling the temperature of the room, the texture of your chair. If you're eating something, you're tasting it. You're experiencing the world through sensation, and along with sensation comes emotion. You might feel curious, bored, interested, frustrated. These feelings aren't thoughts, they're deeper than thought. They're animal reactions, mammalian responses to stimuli. That's the second you, the sensitive you, the part of your soul that perceives and feels. But then there's a third thing happening. You're understanding concepts. You're following an argument. You're thinking about ideas that have no physical form, like soul, form, existence, truth. You're reflecting on your own thoughts. You're aware that you're aware. That's the third you, the rational you, the part of your soul that thinks. And here's what Thomas Aquinas realized. These aren't three different souls competing inside you. The three levels of one soul, nested inside each other like Russian dolls. And understanding how they fit together is the key to solving the soul paradox. Let's start at the bottom. The vegetative soul. Plants have souls. That sounds weird, but think about what plants do. They grow. They take in nutrition from soil and sunlight and convert it into living tissue. They reproduce. They maintain themselves against entropy. They heal damage, replace cells, sustain their own existence. That's life. That's what separates a living plant from dead organic matter. And the principle that makes plants do these things, the organizing force that converts soil and light into roots and leaves, that's the vegetative soul. It's not conscious. It has no awareness. It doesn't feel or think, but it's the first level of life. The foundation. Every living thing has at least this much soul, including you. Right now, beneath your awareness, your vegetative soul is sustaining your biological existence. It's the deepest level of youth, the part that keeps the machine running, while you're busy thinking about other things. But you're not just a plant. You're more. Next level. The sensitive soul. Animals have everything plants have, plus something new. Sensation. An animal can see, hear, taste, touch, smell. It receives information from the environment and responds to it. A dog sees food and moves toward it. A cat hears a threat and runs away. A bird spots a mate and sings. This is a massive upgrade from plant life, because now the organism isn't just passively growing, it's actively engaging with the world. It's perceiving, reacting, learning, remembering. And with sensation comes emotion. Animals feel pleasure and pain. They experience fear, aggression, desire, affection. They're not just biological mechanisms, they're beings with inner experience. However limited, the sensitive soul includes the vegetative functions. Animals still grow, eat, reproduce, but adds this whole new dimension of awareness. And you have this too. You have animal consciousness. You feel hunger, pain, pleasure, fear. You have emotional reactions that aren't intellectual, they're deeper, more primitive, rooted in your mammalian brain. When you jump at a loud noise, that's not your rational soul calculating the probability of danger. That's your sensitive soul reacting instinctively. But again, you're not just an animal. You're more top level, the rational soul. Humans have everything plants and animals have, plus something that no other physical creature possesses: the power of abstract thought. You can think about things that don't exist. You can imagine hypothetical scenarios. You can grasp mathematical truths that apply to all possible universes. You can reflect on your own existence and ask, what am I? Why am I here? What should I do with my life? No dog asks these questions. No cat contemplates the meaning of justice. No lion wonders about the nature of infinity. This is the rational soul, the intellectual power that elevates humans above all other animals. And here's Thomas' crucial insight. The rational soul doesn't replace the vegetative and sensitive souls. It includes them. You're not a pure intellect that happens to have a body underneath. You're a unified being where each level of soul builds on the previous one. Your rational soul is your sensitive soul, is your vegetative soul. One soul, 3 levels of operation. But now we need to understand why this matters for the soul paradox. Because here's the key question. If the soul is the form of the body, if it's totally embedded in materiality, then how can it possibly survive death? Plants die and their souls perish with them. There's no afterlife for tulips. When the matter disintegrates, the form dissolves. The vegetative soul was entirely dependent on the body. Animals die and, according to Thomas, their souls perish too. There's no doggy heaven, no eternal playground for cats. The sensitive soul was bound to the material organs of sensation. No eyes, no seeing, no ears, no hearing, no brain, no memory. When the body fails, the animal soul fails with it. So why should humans be different? What makes the rational soul capable of surviving bodily death when every other kind of soul cannot? And Thomas's answer is brilliant. Because the rational soul has one operation that doesn't depend entirely on matter thinking. Abstract, intellectual, universal thinking. Let's examine this carefully, because this is the heart of Thomas' proof. When you see a red apple, what's happening? Light bounces off the apple, enters your eye, stimulates receptors in your retina, sends electrical signals through your optic nerve to your visual cortex, where neurons fire in patterns that correlate with apple-shaped and red. All of that is material, physical, brain-based, and the sensitive soul, the animal. Part of you is fully involved in that process. You're seeing the apple through bodily organs, but now do something more. Don't just see the apple. Think about apple-ness, double quotes, think about what makes an apple an apple. Think about the universal concept fruit. Think about redness in general. When you do that, you're no longer thinking about this particular apple in front of you. You're thinking about the idea of apple that applies to all possible apples, the ones you've never seen, the ones that don't exist yet, the ones in other countries, other centuries. You're grasping something universal. And here's the problem. Nothing in your brain is universal. Every neuron in your brain is particular. It's a specific cell, in a specific location, firing at a specific time. The pattern of neurons that correlates with your thought about apples is a particular pattern unique to this moment. In this brain, in this skull. But the concept you're grasping, apple in general, is universal. It applies to all apples. Everywhere and everywhere. So how does a particular brain grasp a universal concept? It can't. Not on its own. There must be something in you that's capable of abstracting from the particular to the universal. Something that can take the specific sensory data, this red, round, shiny thing, extract the universal essence, apple-ness. And that something cannot be material, because if it were material, it would be particular. And if it were particular, it couldn't grasp the universal. This is the proof. The rational soul must be immaterial because it performs immaterial operations. Thomas drives the point home with mathematics. Think about a perfect circle, not a drawing of a circle. Those are always imperfect, slightly irregular. Think about the geometric concept of a circle, the set of all points equidistant from a center. That perfect circle doesn't exist anywhere in the physical world. Every circle you've ever seen is approximate, made of pixels, or ink, or pencil. Marks, or atoms that are themselves not perfectly circular. But you can think about the perfect circle anyway. You can do geometry with it. You can prove theorems about it. You can grasp truths about perfect circles that are necessarily, eternally true. None of your neurons are circular. The firing pattern in your brain isn't circular. The physical process of thinking isn't circular. So how are you thinking about circles? Because your intellect, the rational part of your soul, can abstract from material instantiations to immaterial forms. It can grasp the universal concept circle, even though no perfect circle exists in matter. This is what separates humans from animals. Animals can perceive particular things. A dog can see this specific ball, but a dog cannot think about ball in general. It cannot grasp the abstract concept underlying all possible balls. Humans can. We think in universals. We grasp abstract truths. We reason about things that have no physical existence, and that proves our intellect is immaterial. Now here's why this solves the survival problem. The vegetative soul depends entirely on the body. Digestion requires a stomach. Growth requires cells. No body, no vegetative operations. The sensitive soul depends entirely on bodily organs. Vision requires eyes. Hearing requires ears. Memory requires a brain. No body, no sensation. But the rational soul, specifically the intellect, doesn't depend entirely on the body. For its operation, yes, it needs the body to get information. You can't think about apples if you've never seen or heard about apples. The intellect relies on sense data, imagination, memory, all of which are bodily functions. But the actual act of understanding, the moment when you grasp the universal concept, transcends the material process. It's an immaterial operation, performed by an immaterial power. And if the intellect can operate without being entirely reducible to matter, then it can survive without matter. Not comfortably, not completely, not in its natural state, but it can persist. The soul, separated from the body at death, loses its vegetative and sensitive functions. No more digestion, no more sensation. But the intellect, irrational core, continues, diminished, incomplete, longing for a union with the body, but existing nonetheless. This is why humans have immortal souls, not because we're pure spirits, temporarily slumming in flesh, but because the rational soul has one foot in the material world and one foot beyond it. We're amphibians. We live in two realms simultaneously. And this is where Thomas's enemies see their opening, because his position is starting to sound uncomfortably close to Avro's remember. Avros said the intellect is immaterial, therefore it must be universal. Therefore, individual souls don't exist. Thomas is saying the intellect is immaterial, but somehow it's also individual. Somehow it belongs to each specific person. How? How can something immaterial be individual? Isn't immateriality precisely what makes something universal? This is the trap. This is where every philosopher before Thomas has either fallen into materialism, the soul is entirely bodily, therefore mortal, or dualism, the soul is entirely separate. Therefore it can't really unite with the body, or avarism. The intellect is universal. Therefore, individuality is an illusion. Thomas is claiming there's a fourth option. He's claiming the intellect is both immaterial and individual. But he needs to prove it. He needs to show how that's even possible. Because if he can't, then everything he's built collapses. The whole elegant structure of form and matter, vegetative and sensitive and rational, embodied transcendent soul of it falls apart if you can't explain how you have your own individual immaterial intellect. And the pressure is mounting. Paris, 1260s. The controversy is intensifying. The Faculty of Arts is openly teaching avarism now. They're telling students, look, Aristotle proves the intellect is one for all humanity. Philosophy demonstrates this clearly. If theology says something different, that's a problem for theology, not for philosophy. The bishop is furious. The Dominicans are preparing counterattacks. Thomas is caught in the middle, trying to defend both Aristotle and Christianity, insisting. They don't actually contradict if you read Aristotle correctly, but his critics aren't convinced. They think he's playing word games. They think he's trying to have it both ways, claiming the soul is form of the body, materialist, while also claiming it survives death, dualist. They're waiting for him to slip, waiting for him to say something that can be condemned. And Thomas knows he's walking a tightrope. One wrong formulation, one ambiguous phrase, and he could be declared a heretic. But he presses on, because he believes he's right. He believes he's discovered how the soul actually works. And he believes that truth will vindicate him, even if it costs him everything. But there's one more problem he needs to solve before his theory is complete. Because even if he can prove the intellect is individual and immaterial, he still needs to explain how it actually functions. How does the intellect get information from the senses? How does abstract thought connect to concrete experience? How do universal concepts arise from particular perceptions? The mechanism, the actual psychological process start. This is where Thomas has to explain phantasms, mental images that bridge the gap between sense and intellect. This is where he has to describe the agent intellect and the possible intellect, active and passive powers of mind working together to generate thought. This is where philosophy becomes psychology, where metaphysics becomes cognitive science. And this is where Thomas' genius really shines, because he doesn't just assert that the immaterial intellect works with the material senses. He explains how, step by step, mechanism by mechanism, he builds a complete psychology of human cognition from the ground up. And that psychology, that detailed account of how thinking actually happens, is what we need to understand next. Because once you see how Thomas explains the machinery of thought, you'll understand why his solution is so compelling, and why it threatened everything. Close your eyes for a moment. Now picture an elephant. Go ahead. See it in your mind. You're probably seeing something grey, with a trunk, big ears, maybe tusks. It might be walking. It might be standing still. Maybe it's an African elephant. Maybe Asian. Maybe you're seeing a cartoon elephant, or a photo you remember, or some composite image your brain has assembled from various elephants you've encountered. Open your eyes. Here's the question. What were you just doing? You weren't seeing an actual elephant. There's no elephant in the room. You weren't thinking about the abstract concept elephant in general either. You saw something specific, with particular features. You were imagining. You were working with a mental image, something halfway between pure sensation and pure thought. Thomas Aquinas calls this a phantasm, and it's the key to understanding how human thinking actually works. Because here's the problem Thomas has created for himself. He's proven that the intellect is immaterial. It has to be, because it grasps universal concepts. But he's also proven that humans are essentially embodied. The soul is the form of the body. They're one unified thing. So how does an immaterial intellect get information from material senses? How do you get from photons hitting your retina to understanding the concept tree? There's a gap, a chasm, between matter and mind, between sensation and thought, and Thomas needs to build a bridge. Let's start with what happens when you perceive something. You're walking in a forest. Light bounces off a tree, enters your eyes, stimulates photoreceptors, sends electrical signals to your brain. That's all material, physical, measurable. But you don't just have light hitting your retina. You have an experience of seeing the tree. You're aware of it. There's something it's like to see that tree, the greenness, the texture of bark, the shape of branches. This is sensation. And it's already halfway between pure matter and pure mind. Here's why. The tree itself is material made of cellulose and chlorophyll and carbon. But your experience of the tree isn't material in the same way. The greenness you see isn't in the tree. The tree has surface properties that reflect certain wavelengths of light. The greenness is in your perception, in your consciousness. Thomas says when you perceive something, you receive the form of the thing without its matter. The trees form its shape, color, texture gets impressed on your sense organs and your imagination. But you don't take in the actual wood and leaves. You take in the sensible form. It's like pressing a seal into wax. The wax receives the shape of the seal, but not its substance. Your senses receive the form of the tree, but not its matter. This is sensation, form without matter, but still tied to material organs, your eyes, your brain, your nervous system. But sensation is an understanding. A dog can see a tree. A dog receives the sensible form, light, color, shape. The dog's sensitive. Soul is fully engaged. But the dog doesn't understand tree. It doesn't grasp the concept. It doesn't think about what makes something a tree versus a shrub. Doesn't classify it taxonomically. Doesn't abstract the universal essence. Humans do. We don't just see individual trees, we understand treeness. We think about categories, essences, definitions. So there's another step, from sensation to intellection, from perceiving particular things to understanding universal concepts. And this is where the phantasm comes in. The phantasm is a mental image. After you see the tree, even after you close your eyes, you can still picture it. You have a mental representation, not the tree itself, not even the direct sensory experience, but an image stored in imagination and memory. This phantasm is still particular. It's an image of that tree with those specific features, but it's one step removed from direct sensation. It's internalized, stored, available for mental manipulation. And here's what Thomas says. The intellect never thinks without a phantasm. Never. Even when you're thinking about the most abstract concepts, justice, infinity, being itself, you're always working with some kind of mental image. Even if it's just a vague, fuzzy representation, or a word shape, or a geometric symbol, try it. Try to think about triangle without imagining any particular triangle. You can't. Your mind automatically generates an image, maybe a specific triangle, maybe several overlapping, but always something concrete. The intellect needs phantasms, the way a musician needs an instrument. The musician's skill transcends the instrument. But the musician can't make music without it. Your intellect can grasp universal truths, but it can't operate without particular images. This is the bridge Thomas is building. The senses give you particular, material information. The intellect grasps universal, immaterial truths. The phantasm is the middle term, particular but immaterial, concrete but mental. It's the interface, the meeting point between two worlds. But there's still a problem. How does the intellect extract universals from particulars? How do you get from this specific tree to tree in general? Because the phantasm, the mental image, is still particular. It's an image of a specific tree. So how does your intellect see past the particularity to grasp the universal essence? And here's where Thomas introduces one of his most subtle and brilliant ideas, the agent intellect. You don't just have one intellect. You have two. Actually, that's not quite right. You have one intellect with two different functions, two powers, two modes of operation. There's the possible intellect, also called the passive intellect. This is the part of your mind that receives ideas, that holds concepts. That's the storehouse of your understanding. Think of it like a blank page, ready to be written on, or a mirror, ready to reflect images. It's pure potential, the capacity to know anything, but not actually knowing anything until it receives forms. Then there's the agent intellect, also called the active intellect. This is the part of your mind that does the abstracting, that takes the particular phantasms and extracts the universal concepts. It's like a light that illuminates, or a craftsman that carves. It actively operates on the mental images, stripping away the particular features to reveal the universal essence. Here's how it works. You see 100 different trees: oak, pine, maple, willow, different sizes, colors, shapes. Each one creates a phantasma mental image. Your agent intellect examines these phantasms and asks, what do all these have in common? What's essential to being a tree versus accidental features? It strips away the particular details, this specific height, that specific leaf shape, and extracts the universal concept. A tree is a perennial plant with a trunk and branches. That universal concept gets impressed on the possible intellect. Now you understand what a tree is. You're no longer just perceiving individual traits, you've grasped the essence. And once you have that concept, you can think about all possible trees. Trees that don't exist yet. Trees in other countries you've never visited. Trees as a category of being. You've moved from particular to universal. From sensation to intelliction. And the agent intellect is what makes that move possible. This is brilliant. But it's also walking a tightrope, because Thomas is trying to avoid two opposite errors. On one side, pure materialism. The idea that thinking is just brain states, just neurons firing in patterns. If that's true, then there's nothing immaterial about the intellect. It's entirely reducible to physical processes, and that means it dies with the body. Thomas can't accept this. He's proven the intellect grasps universals, which transcends any particular material process. On the other side, pure immaterialism. The idea that the intellect is totally separate from the body, that it operates independently of sensation, that it has innate ideas that don't come from experience. This is Plato's view. The soul remembers eternal forms from before birth. The body is irrelevant, maybe even an obstacle. Thomas can't accept this either, because he's proven the soul is the form of the body. They're united. The intellect needs phantasms. It can't think without them. So Thomas threads the needle. The intellect is immaterial in its operation. It grasps universals, but it's dependent on material sensation for its content. It needs the body to give it something to think about. The intellect is like fire. Fire is immaterial. It's a process, not a substance. But it needs fuel. It can't exist without something material to burn. And this is where his critics see weakness. If the intellect needs phantasms, if it can't think without mental images derived from sensation, then how is it really immaterial? How is it really independent of the body? Sure, it abstracts universals, but it abstracts them from sensory data. It's dependent on the senses, which are dependent on the brain, which is material. So when the brain dies, doesn't the intellect die? 2. When there's no more sensation, no more phantasms, what does the intellect have to work with? This is the objection. This is where materialists think they've caught Thomas in a contradiction, and Thomas's answer is both profound and disturbing. He admits it, the separated soul, the soul after death, without a body, is in an unnatural, diminished state. It can't sense. It can't form new phantasms. It can't learn new things through experience, but it retains the concepts it already has. The possible intellect doesn't lose what it's already understood. The ideas you've grasped during life persist, and the intellect can think about those retained. Concepts can combine them, can reason about them. But it's like thinking in a dark room with limited resources. You're working with what you already have, not acquiring new material. This is why the resurrection is necessary. Not just theologically nice, but philosophically required. Humans aren't meant to be disembodied souls. The soul without the body is incomplete. It can survive, its rational power persists, but it's not fully functional. It's like a musician without an instrument, still possessing the skill but unable to perform. The soul longs for the body, needs the body, is incomplete without it. And when the resurrection comes, when soul reunites with body, then the human person is whole again, fully functional, able to sense, imagine, and think in the integrated way we were designed to function. This is radical, and it makes everyone uncomfortable. The Platonists hate it. They want the soul to be happily independent, better off without the body. Thomas is saying, no, separation is a tragedy. The materialists hate it. They want proof that the soul can't survive bodily death. Thomas is saying, it survives, but it's diminished. The intellect persists because it has one operation that transcends matter. The Averroists hate it. They want the intellect to be universal, shared by all. Thomas is saying, no, each person has their own agent intellect, their own possible intellect, their own individual rational soul. Everyone has a reason to attack him, and the attacks are coming 1270. Paris, the Faculty of Arts, is openly teaching propositions that contradict Thomas's view. They're saying, the intellect is one for all humans. Individual souls don't exist. What philosophy proves and what faith teaches are two separate truths. The Franciscans, rivals to Thomas Dominico, order are attacking him from the other side. They say he's too Aristotelian, too rationalistic, too willing to compromise faith for philosophy. The Bishop of Paris is preparing a condemnation, a list of errors that will be officially declared heretical, and Thomas's name is being whispered in connection with that list, because he's done something dangerous. He's built a philosophical system that tries to satisfy everyone and ends up satisfying no one. His claim the soul is both material and immaterial, both embodied and transcendent, both dependent on sensation and capable of abstract thought. He has claimed you can prove the soul's immortality with reason alone, but the soul still needs the body to be fully human. He has claimed to reconcile Aristotle and Christianity, faith and reason, philosophy and theology, and both sides think he's gone too far. But Thomas isn't backing down, because there's one more challenge he needs to face, one more argument he needs to defeat: the problem of individuality. If the intellect is immaterial, how can there be multiple intellects? How can your soul be different? From my soul, matter individuates, form universalizes. So if the soul is formeth, the intellect is immaterial, shouldn't it be universal? This is Avro's trump card. This is the argument that seems to prove individual souls can't exist. And if Thomas can't answer it, everything collapses. All his careful distinctions, all his elegant solutions, all his bridges between worlds, they all fall apart if he can't explain how you are genuinely, irreducibly, individually you, not a temporary manifestation of universal mind, not a configuration that will dissolve at death, but an individual person with an individual soul that persists forever. Everything depends on answering this question, and the answer will either vindicate Thomas or destroy him. You know you shouldn't eat that second piece of cake. You know it. Your intellect has assessed the situation. You're full. You're trying to eat healthier. That cake is pure sugar and refined carbs. It's not even that good. You'll regret it. Your reason has spoken. The judgment is clear. Don't eat the cake. And yet, you eat it anyway. What just happened? Did you suddenly become stupid? Did you forget your reasoning? Did new information emerge that changed the calculation? No. You knew it was a bad idea. You understood all the reasons not to do it. Your intellect was functioning perfectly, but you did it anyway. Welcome to the civil war inside your head, the battle between intellect and will. And understanding this battle is essential to understanding what Thomas Aquinas discovered about human nature. Because we're not purely rational creatures. We're not just thinking machines that automatically do whatever reason determines is best. We're something stranger, something more complicated. Something that can know the good and choose evil anyway. And Thomas needs to explain how that's possible. Let's start with a simple observation. You have two different powers. There's the intellect, the power to understand truth, to grasp concepts, reason logically, figure out what's real and what isn't. The intellect is cognitive. It's about knowing. Then there's the willful power to desire and choose, to be attracted to things, to pursue them, to decide what to do. The will is appetitive. It's about wanting. And these two powers are distinct. They're not the same thing. You can understand something without wanting it. You can know that exercise is good for you without desiring to exercise. The intellect sees the truth. The will remains unmoved. You can want something without understanding why. You can crave chocolate without being able to explain the neurochemistry of sugar addiction. The will desires. The intellect catches up later. The intellect and will are two separate powers of the rational soul. And they don't always agree. Here's how they're supposed to work together. The intellect's job is to present reality to the will, to say, here's what's true, here's what's good, here's what will actually make you happy. The will's job is to respond to what the intellect presents, to choose the genuine good, to pursue what's truly worthwhile. In a perfectly rational being, say an angel, this works smoothly. The angel's intellect sees the good clearly, and the angel's will immediately, necessarily, chooses it. No conflict, no hesitation, no possibility of choosing evil once you clearly see it as evil. But humans aren't angels. We're rational animals. We have intellect and will, yes, but we also have sensitive appetites, animal desires, emotions, impulses that don't consult reason before acting. You have higher desires and lower desires, rational desires and animal desires, and they fight. This is where it gets messy. Your intellect might say, the genuinely good thing here is to save money and invest in your future. But your sensitive appetite, the animal part of you, sees something shiny in the store window and says, want, now. And now your will is caught in the middle. It has to choose. Does it follow the intellect's judgment? Or does it follow the sensitive appetite's impulse? And here's the disturbing part. The will is free to choose either one, even when the intellect clearly shows that one option is better. The will can choose the worse option, not because it's confused, not because it lacks information, but because it's attracted to the immediate pleasure, the emotional satisfaction, the animal reward. This is what Thomas calls disordered desire. When the will chooses against reason, preferring a lesser good to a greater one. And this is the psychology of sin. For Thomas isn't primarily about ignorance. The Socratic view was that all sin is error. If you really understood what was good, you'd automatically choose it. No one does evil knowingly. They only do it because they're confused about what's actually good. Thomas says, no, that's not how humans work. You can know something is wrong and do it anyway. Not because you think it's right, but because you want it, even though it's wrong. The alcoholic knows drinking is destroying his life. The intellect sees this clearly, but the will, drawn by the immediate relief, the temporary escape, chooses the drink anyway. The person having an affair knows it's betraying their spouse. The intellect understands the harm, the betrayal, the violation of commitment, but the will, drawn by passion and novelty, chooses it anyway. This is the human condition. Knowing the good but choosing evil. Understanding the right path but walking the wrong one. We're not just ignorant, we're disordered. Our wills are misdirected, attracted to the wrong things, choosing lesser goods over greater ones. But here's the question that makes this complicated. Are we free? If the intellect presents truth to the will, and the will just automatically follows sensitive appetite instead, then are we really choosing? Or are we just being pushed around by our emotions and impulses? Thomas walks another tightrope here. On one side, determinism, the idea that all our choices are caused by prior events, that we're just complex machines responding to inputs. that free will is an illusion. If this is true, then moral responsibility collapses. You can't blame someone for a choice they couldn't help making. Sin becomes meaningless. Justice becomes impossible. On the other side, absolute libertarian freedom. The idea that the will is completely uncaused, that it chooses randomly or arbitrarily, that there's no reason or explanation for why you choose what you choose. If this is true, then you're not really rational. Your choices are just random events happening in your soul. There's no connection between who you are and what you choose. Thomas rejects both extremes. His answer: the will is free, but not arbitrary. The will is not determined by anything outside itself. No external cause forces you to choose. Not God, not your genes, not your environment, not even your own intellect. When you choose something, you are the cause of that choice, not something else acting through you. You. This is genuine freedom, genuine agency. You are the ultimate source of your own actions. But this is crucial. The will doesn't choose randomly. It chooses for reasons. It's attracted to what appears good. It's moved by desires and values and judgments. The will is free from external determination, but internally motivated by the good as presented by the intellect. Here's the mechanism. The intellect shows the will various options and says, this one is good because X, that one is good because Y. The will, drawn by goodness, chooses one. But here's the key. For any finite good, the intellect can always see both its goodness and its limitations. This job pays well, but requires long hours. That relationship offers companionship, but demands sacrifice. This pleasure is intense, but temporary. Every finite option has pros and cons, and because the intellect can see both sides, the will isn't necessitated to choose any particular option. It's free to weigh the considerations and decide. Only if the intellect presented a perfect, unlimited good something with no drawbacks, no limitations, pure goodness with no mixture of evil only, then would the will be necessitated to choose it, and there is only one perfect good, God. Which is why, Thomas argues, seeing God face to face would necessitate loving him. You couldn't help it. The will, confronted with infinite goodness clearly perceived, would necessarily embrace it. But short of that, short of the beatific vision, every choice is free. This explains why humans are so messy. We're not purely rational. If we were, we'd always choose what reason determines is best. We'd be like computers executing optimal algorithms. We're not purely determined. If we were, we couldn't be held responsible for our choices. We'd be like billiard balls bouncing according to physical laws. We're rational animals with free will. We have intellect that shows us truth, will that chooses us freely, and sensitive appetites that pull us toward immediate pleasures, and these three parts of us are constantly in conflict. Your intellect says, long-term happiness requires discipline. Your sensitive appetite says, but ice cream feels good now. Your will has to choose. Which do I follow? And the tragedy is that we often choose badly. We know better, but we do worse. We understand the right path, but we walk the wrong one. Not always, not inevitably, but often enough that every human recognizes the experience. St. Paul described it perfectly. I do not understand my own actions, for I do not do what I want, but I do the very thing I hate. Thomas is giving the philosophical explanation for Paul's existential cry, and this connects to modern psychology in surprising ways. In 2011, Daniel Kahneman won the Nobel Prize for describing two systems of thinking, System 1 and System 2. System 1 is fast, automatic, emotional, intuitive. It's your immediate reactions, your gut feelings, your instinctive responses. System 2 is slow, deliberate, logical, calculating. It's your conscious reasoning, your careful analysis, your rational planning. Sound familiar? System 1 is basically Thomas' sensitive appetite, the animal part of you responding to immediate stimuli. System 2 is basically Thomas' intellect, the rational part of you evaluating options carefully, and the will. That's your executive function, the part that decides which system to follow in any given situation. Thomas mapped the architecture of human psychology 750 years before modern cognitive science rediscovered it. He understood that we're not unified, rational agents. We're composite beings with multiple systems that often conflict. And we have to navigate that conflict constantly. But here's where Thomas goes deeper than modern psychology, because modern psychology can describe the conflict. It can map the systems. It can predict behavior patterns. But it struggles with the fundamental question, are you responsible? If your choices are caused by brain chemistry, genetics, childhood experiences, and environmental factors, all of which are outside your control, then how are you morally responsible for what you choose? Modern neuroscience seems to suggest determinism. Your brain states cause your choices. You didn't choose your brain states. Therefore, you didn't really choose your choices. But Thomas argues, the will is not reducible to brain states. The will is a power of the rational soul, which is immaterial in its operation. The will is the ultimate source of choice, not just the downstream effect of neural firing. When you choose, not your neurons, not your chemistry, not your environment. You, and that's why you're responsible. That's why praise and blame make sense. That's why moral evaluation is real, because freedom is real. Agency is real. You are genuinely the author of your actions. But this creates a new problem. If the will is free, if it can choose against reason, if it can prefer lesser goods to greater ones, then how do you ever achieve virtue? How do you become the kind of person who consistently chooses well? Because Thomas isn't just interested in individual choices. He's interested in character, in what kind of person you're becoming through your choices. Every time you choose against reason, every time you follow appetite instead of intellect or reinforcing that pattern, you're training your will to be weak, to give in to impulse, to prefer immediate pleasure over genuine good. You're forming vice, bad habits, character defects, and the more you choose badly, the harder it becomes to choose well. Your will gets progressively weaker, more disordered, more enslaved to passion. This is the downward spiral of sin, not just individual bad choices, but a systematic corruption of character. The good news is that the opposite is also true. Every time you choose, every time you follow reason against impulse, every time you prefer genuine good over immediate pleasure, you're training your will to be strong. You're forming virtue, good habits, character strengths, and the more you choose well, the easier it becomes. Your will gets progressively stronger, more ordered, more free to choose the genuine good without being yanked around by every passing desire. This is the upward spiral of virtue. Not just individual good choices, but a systematic transformation of character. And this brings us to a disturbing realization. You're not just making choices, you're making yourself. Every choice you make shapes who you're becoming. Every time you choose, you're voting on what kind of person you want to be. Choose laziness often enough, and you become a lazy person. Choose courage often enough, and you become brave. Choose honesty, and you become honest. Choose deception, and you become a liar. Not just in action, but in character. In your very soul, your choices carve pathways in your will. They create patterns, habits, dispositions. They determine what becomes easy for you and what becomes hard. And ultimately, they determine your destiny. Because if character persists, beyond death, if the soul's dispositions continue after the body fails, then the person you're becoming now is the person you'll be forever. Heaven isn't just a place you go. It's the natural destination of a soul that has learned to love truth and goodness. Hell isn't just a punishment imposed. It's the natural destination of a soul that has chosen, consistently and finally, to reject the good. You're not just choosing actions, you're choosing yourself. You're choosing your eternity, and that makes every choice infinitely significant. Who are you? Not your name, not your job, not your relationships or achievements. Who are you thinking, choosing, experiencing subject behind all of those things? Are you a real individual person? A unique center of consciousness that will persist forever? Or are you just a temporary pattern in a universal mind? A brief ripple on the surface of a cosmic ocean of consciousness that will dissolve back into the whole when your body dies? This isn't an abstract philosophical question. This is the most personal question you can ask. Because if individual souls don't exist, if there's only one shared intellect for all humanity, then you don't really exist. Not as a person, not as an individual, not as something that will survive. Death. You're just a temporary configuration, a fleeting moment in the life of something much larger. And when you die, you simply cease. The universal mind continues, but the individual you thought you were, gone. Dissolved, never really real. To begin with, this is what Averroes argued. This is the bomb he dropped on medieval philosophy, and Thomas Aquinas has to defuse it, because everything depends on proving that you individual, particular, irreplaceable, you are real. Let's understand Averroes' argument, because it's devastatingly logical. Starts with a premise that seems obvious. Immaterial things are universal. Why? Because matter is what makes things individual and particular. This bronze statue is different from that marble statue because of the different matter. Different material instantiation. But if something has no matter, what makes it individual? What distinguishes one immaterial thing from another immaterial thing of the same type? Angels, in medieval theology, are each unique species, not different individuals of the same kind, but fundamentally different types of beings. Gabriel isn't. Michael with different matter. Gabriel and Michael are as different as cats and dogs. Each angel is its own species, but human intellects. If they're immaterial, they should all be the same type. Human intellect as such. the power of abstract reasoning, the capacity for universal thought. So, what makes your intellect different from my intellect? Abros says, nothing. There's only one intellect, shared by all humans. Here's how Abros thinks it works. There's a single, universal agent intellect, the active power that abstracts universals from phantasms. It's not in your head or my head. It's a separate cosmic intelligence that humans temporarily connect to. When you think, you're not generating your own thoughts. Your brain produces phantasms, mental images on. The universal agent intellect operates on those phantasms, extracting concepts. For a moment, you're connected to this universal mind. You experience thinking, but it's not really your thinking. You're just the material occasion for the universal intellect to operate. It's like multiple computers connecting to the same server. The processing doesn't happen in the individual computers, it happens in the cloud. The individual machines are just terminals. You're a terminal, not a person. And this view has some philosophical advantages. It explains how the intellect can be immaterial, because it's not actually in material bodies. It's separate, and bodies just connect to it temporarily. It explains how we can all understand the same truths, because we're all accessing the same universal intellect. When you and I both understand that 2 equals 4, we're not having two separate thoughts that happen to agree. We're both plugged into the same truth in the same cosmic mind. It solves the problem of how immaterial things can be multiple. They can't. There's only one elegant, clean, philosophically sophisticated, and absolutely devastating to Christianity. Because if Avros is right, then everything collapses. No individual souls, then no personal immortality. When you die, the connection to the universal intellect savors. That's it. No you continuing. No afterlife for you as an individual. No individual moral responsibility. Then no judgment. How can you be held accountable for actions if you are just a temporary configuration, not a real persisting agent? No resurrection. Then why would the universal intellect reconnect to your particular body at the end of time? There's no individual you to resurrect. The entire Christian narrative requires that persons are real, that individuals matter, that you are not an illusion. And Avros is saying, philosophically speaking, individuals are illusions. There's only the one. Thomas knows he has to defeat this argument, not by just asserting Christian doctrine. The Averroists will say, that's fine for theology, but philosophy proves otherwise. This is the double truth problem, philosophy says one thing, faith says another. Both are valid in their own domains. No. Thomas has to defeat Avros on philosophical grounds. He has to show where the argument goes wrong using logic and observation alone. And he does. But the argument is subtle. Bear with me, because this gets technical, but it's worth it. Thomas counterattack. You think your thoughts? Seems obvious. Right? When you think about mathematics, you are thinking, not someone else. Not a universal mind that you're passively observing. You, how do we know this? Because thinking is an action, and actions belong to individuals. When Socrates walks, Socrates is walking, not walking in general instantiated through Socrates' legs. When you see a tree, You are seeing, not seeing in general, happening through your eyes. And when you think, you are thinking, not the universal intellect thinking while you watch. But Avros can respond, sure, it seems like you're thinking. But that's just the subjective experience. What's actually happening is the universal intellect operating on phantasms in your brain. And you mistakenly identify that operation as your own. So Thomas needs a stronger argument. Here's the key insight. The intellect must be the form of your body. Remember form and matter? The soul is the form that organizes matter into a living human. If the intellect were separate, if it were a universal mind you connect tooth in it, wouldn't be the form of your body. It would be an external entity temporarily associated with you. But that creates a problem. What makes you alive? What makes you human? If the intellect is separate, then your body is just an animal body with sensitive soul perception, emotion, memory, but no rational thought. The rationality would be added from outside, temporarily. But that's not what humans are. You're not an animal that sometimes gets possessed by a universal mind. You're essentially rational. Rationality is part of your nature, not an external addition. The human soul, including its intellectual power, must be the form of the body. It must be what makes you, specifically, human. And if it's the form of your body, if it's intrinsically united to your particular matter, then it must be individual. Your soul is individuated by its relationship to your body. Wait, but didn't Thomas say the intellect is immaterial? Yes. And this is the brilliance of his solution. The intellect is immaterial in its operation. It grasps universals, which transcends material processes. But the intellect is the intellect of a particular person. It's your intellect because it's the rational power of your soul, which is the form of your body. Matter doesn't individuate the intellect directly. The intellect doesn't have matter. But matter individuates the soul, and the intellect is a power of that soul. Think of it like this. Your vision is the power to see. That power itself isn't material. It's not identical to the physical eyeball, but it's the power of your eyes, not someone else's. Similarly, your intellect is the power to think. That power itself isn't material. It operates on universals. But it's the power of your soul, which is the form of your body. Your intellect is yours. Individual, unique, real. Thomas drives the point home with a thought experiment. If there were only one intellect for all humans, then when you and I think about the same thing, we'd be having the same thought, not just similar, but that's absurd. When you understand that 2 + 2 = 4, and I understand that 2 + 2 = 4, we're having two different acts of understanding that grasp the same truth. The truth is universal, but the understanding is individual. I know this because I'm aware of my understanding. In a way, I'm not aware of yours. I have privileged access to my own thoughts. I can't read your mind. Our thoughts are private, individual, distinct. If there were one shared intellect, that wouldn't make sense. There would be no distinction between your thoughts and mine. But there obviously is a distinction. Therefore, there must be individual intellects. Therefore, Avros is wrong. And Thomas doesn't stop there. He goes on the offensive. He systematically dismantles every argument Avros made. He shows that Aristotle, properly interpreted, doesn't support Avroism. He demonstrates that the view leads to absurd consequences. If the intellect is separate and universal, then Learning would be impossible, you can't acquire what's already universal. Forgetting would be impossible, the universal intellect doesn't. Lose knowledge, individual differences in intelligence would be inexplicable. We're all accessing the same mind, the very fact that we have different beliefs would make no sense. SS, relentless. He's not just defending his position, he's destroying the opposition. And it's working. The philosophical arguments are compelling. The logical force is undeniable. But it's also making enemies, because Thomas is fighting on multiple fronts. Against Averroes, yes. He's defeating their arguments, exposing their errors, showing that individual souls are philosophically necessary, but he's also fighting Christian Platonists, particularly Augustinians, who think the soul is too spiritual, too independent of the body in Thomas' system. They don't like his insistence that the soul is the form of the body. They think it makes the soul too dependent on matter. They want a more Platonic picture where the soul is a complete substance in itself, just temporarily using a body. Thomas is saying, no, the soul without the body is incomplete. They're made for each other. Unity is the natural state, and this makes the Platonists uncomfortable. They think he's compromising the dignity of the soul. They think he's being too materialistic. So Thomas is squeezed from both sides. Averroes seems too dualistic, believing in individual immaterial souls. Augustinians think he's too materialistic, tying the soul to the body. Everyone has a reason to attack him. 1270. The pressure reaches a breaking point. The Bishop of Paris issues a condemnation. 13 propositions are declared erroneous. Some of them are clearly Averroes denying individual souls, asserting double truth. But some of them ... Some of them sound uncomfortably close to things Thomas has said. The condemnation doesn't name Thomas directly, but everyone knows. The whispers are circulating. Some of Thomas' positions are under suspicion, and Thomas is forced to write defenses, to clarify his views, to distinguish his position from the condemned errors. It's exhausting. It's politically dangerous. His reputation is under assault. But Thomas keeps writing, keeps arguing, keeps refining his position, because he knows he's right. He knows individual persons are real. He knows the soul is both embodied and transcendent. He knows you can prove this with reason alone. And he's not going to let political pressure or theological rivalry make him compromise the truth. The cost is real. Thomas is making powerful enemies. The Franciscan order rivals to the Dominicans are actively working against him. The conservative theologians at the University of Paris see him as dangerous. The radical philosophers see him as restrictive. He's isolated. Few understand what he's trying to do. Fewer still appreciate the delicate balance he's maintaining, and the stress is taking a toll. Thomas is in his mid-40s now. He's been writing constantly massive works, detailed commentaries, polemical treatises. He's been teaching, debating, defending, clarifying that the physical and mental strain is enormous. But there's one more problem he needs to solve, one more mystery he needs to address, because he's proven that individual souls survive death. But what happens to them? What is the soul like when separated from the body? This is the question that will lead to his most controversial position, the answer that will upset both sides, the truth that will make everyone uncomfortable, because Thomas is about to argue that death is not a liberation, it's a tragedy. A rupture, an unnatural state that cries out for healing, and that healing has a name: resurrection. Imagine waking up without a body, no eyes to see, no ears to hear, no hands to touch, no taste, no smell, no physical sensation of any kind. You still exist. You're still conscious. You're still you. But you're cut off from the physical world entirely. No. New experiences. No sensory input. No way to interact with anything material. You can think but only about things you already know. You can remember, but those memories are fading, losing their vividness without sensory reinforcement. You can reason, but you have nothing new to reason about. You're like a musician who's lost their instrument. The skill remains, but you can't perform. The capacity persists, but you can't exercise it fully. This, according to Thomas Aquinas, is what death is like. And it's not a liberation. It's not an escape into pure spiritual bliss. It's not the soul finally breaking free from its bodily prison. It's a tragedy, a rupture, a fundamentally unnatural state. And when Thomas says this, when he insists that the separated soul is incomplete, diminished, longing for reunion with the body, he triggers an explosion that will almost destroy his legacy. Let's understand what Thomas is claiming, because it's more radical than it sounds. Most Christian theology, up to this point, heavily influenced by Plato and Augustine, had presented death as the soul's release. The body was a burden, a limitation, sometimes even a prison. Death freed the soul to soar upward to heaven, unencumbered by flesh. Sure, there would be a resurrection at the end of time, but that was almost an afterthought, a bonus. The soul was perfectly happy as a pure spirit. Thomas says, no, that's wrong, dangerously wrong. The soul is not meant to exist without the body. The natural state of a human soul is embodied. When the soul separates from the body at death, it's in an abnormal condition, not impossible, not non-existent, but abnormal, incomplete. Like a hand severed from the arm, it's still a hand, but it can't function properly. It's out of place. Here's why Thomas thinks this must be true. Remember, the soul is the form of the body. They're not two separate things that happen to be connected. They're one unified subsuming human being. The form needs matter. The soul is designed to animate flesh, to organize matter, to work through bodily organs. Yes, the intellect can survive separation because it has one operation of abstract thought that doesn't depend entirely on matter. That's why the soul persists after death. But every other power of the soul depends on the body. Vegetative powers, nutrition, growth, reproduction, gone without biological systems. Sensitive powers, sensation, emotion, memory, imagination gone. Without sense organs and brain of intellectual powers are diminished. No new phantasms means no new concepts. To grasp the separated soul retains the concepts it already has. It can think about those. It can reason about them. But it can't learn anything new from experience. It can't sense the world. It can't interact with matter. It's like being locked in a room with only the books you brought with you. You can read those books over and over, but you'll never encounter anything new. Never have a fresh experience. Never grow through interaction with reality. This is not the ideal state. This is exile. And this is where Thomas drops the real bomb. The soul wants the body back. not out of weakness, not out of sin or imperfection, out of its very nature. A human soul without a body is like an eye without light to see, or a musician without music to play. The capacity remains, but the actualization is impossible. The soul naturally desires to animate matter, to see through eyes, hear through ears, think through imagination fed by sensation, to be whole. And that desire, that longing for embodiment is built into the very structure of the soul. It's not optional. It's not a defect. It's part of what it means to be human. This is why the resurrection isn't just a theological nice-to-have. It's a metaphysical necessity. The soul will be reunited with the body because that's what the soul is for. That's its natural completion. That's the restoration of the unity that death temporarily severed. Heaven, in Tonga's view, isn't disembodied spirits floating in clouds. It's resurrected person's body and soul reunited, experiencing the fullness of human existence in the presence of God. And this makes absolutely everyone uncomfortable. The Platonists are horrified. They've spent centuries teaching that the body is inferior, that the soul is better off without it, that spiritual existence is higher than material. Existence, Thomas is saying. No, embodiment isn't a bug, it's a feature. Matter isn't evil or limiting. It's good. The body isn't a prison, it's the natural home of the soul. This sounds materialistic to them. It sounds like he's compromising the transcendence of the soul. It sounds like he's saying matter matters more than spirit. The materialists, on the other hand, are equally upset. If the soul is so dependent on the body, if it can't function properly without sensory input and physical organs, then how is it really immaterial? How does it survive at all? Thomas is saying, the intellect survives because it has one operation that transcends matter. But yes, survival is diminished. Yes, the soul needs the body for full functionality. This sounds like he's admitting the soul is more material than he's claimed. It sounds like he's conceding that the intellect isn't truly independent. Both sides think he's contradicting himself. Both sides think he's compromised too much to the other side. But Thomas isn't done yet. He goes further. He argues that even in the intermediate state between death and resurrections are separated, soul has a kind of suffering, not the suffering of punishment in hellfire. That comes later, for those who've chosen it, but the suffering of incompleteness, of being in an unnatural state. The soul experiences what Thomas calls natural desire for reunion with the body. Not a conscious, agonizing craving necessarily, but a metaphysical incompleteness, a lack of fulfillment. It's like hunger, but deeper. Not the pain of starvation, but the awareness of absence, the sense that something essential is missing. Even the blessed souls in heaven, even those experiencing the beatific vision, seeing God face to face of on, they long for the resurrection. Not because heaven is insufficient, but because they're not yet complete human beings. A soul without a body is not a full person, and even perfect happiness with God doesn't entirely fill that gap until the resurrection comes. This is shocking and dangerous, because Thomas is saying that even the blessed aren't perfectly happy until the resurrection. Even in the presence of God, there's a sense of iron comp, eterness. Conservative theologians jump on this. They say, are you claiming that seeing God isn't enough? Are you saying the saints in heaven are dissatisfied? Are you limiting divine beatitude? Thomas responds carefully. The soul's happiness in seeing God is perfect relative to its current state, but the soul's current state is imperfect. So there's room for greater fulfillment when the natural state is restored. It's a subtle distinction, too subtle for his critics. They hear, the soul needs matter to be happy. Therefore, Thomas has made matter more important than God. Heresy. And then there's the embodied cognition problem. If thinking requires phantasms, the intellect always works through mental images derived from sensation, then how does the separated soul think at all? No body means no senses. No senses means no new phantasms. No new phantasms means what? Does thinking stop? Thomas says. The separated soul can still think using phantasms it already has stored, like working from memory rather than live perception. But, critics ask, how long do those stored phantasms last without sensory reinforcement? Don't memories fade? Doesn't imagination need constant input to remain vivid? And if the soul can think without new phantasms, if it can operate on purely retained concepts, then why did it need phantasms in the first place? Why not admit the intellect is purely immaterial and independent? Thomas is caught in a bind. He's trying to maintain both the embodied nature of human thinking and the survival of the soul. And the tension is showing. But here's the deeper issue. Thomas is threatening traditional views of the afterlife. The popular Christian imagination of his time and ours pictures souls in heaven or hell immediately after death, fully conscious, fully functional, experiencing rewards or punishments. Thomas' philosophy seems to complicate this. If the soul is diminished without the body, how is it experiencing anything fully? How is the rich man in Jesus' parables suffering in flames? How are the saints interceding for us? Thomas has answers. He says God can give separated souls special knowledge directly, without sensation. He says they can have quasi-sensory experiences miraculously sustained. He says the beatific vision itself provides content for thought beyond what any natural phantasm could offer. But these answers sound like special pleading, like he's adding epicycles to save the theory. His critics smell blood in the water. 1277. 7 years after the first condemnation, 4 years after Thomas's death, the Bishop of Paris issues a massive new condemnation. 219 propositions are declared erroneous and prohibited from being taught at the university. Many of them are clearly targeting Avarism, but scattered throughout the list are propositions that sound uncomfortably close to Thomas's positions, that the soul is so the form of the body that it cannot exist without it, that the separated soul cannot think about singular things, that the soul suffers from bodily passion. These aren't direct quotes from Thomas, but they echo his ideas. And everyone knows it. Some of Thomas' own brethren Dominican theologians, who should be defending him, are forced to distance themselves, to clarify that they don't hold these errors, to quietly revise Thomas's positions in their own teaching. Thomas, magnum opus, the Summa Theologica, is under a cloud. Parts of it are suspected of heresy. Students are warned away from certain sections. The man who tried to reconcile faith and reason, Aristotle and Christianity, philosophy and theology, is condemned by the very church he's served. But something interesting happens. The condemnation doesn't destroy Thomas' ideas. It actually clarifies them. His defenders are forced to explain exactly what he meant. to distinguish his subtle positions from crude misunderstandings, to show how his view is actually more orthodox than his critics claim. And slowly over decades, tide turns. Thinkers begin to realize Thomas was right about something important. He was right that we are essentially embodied, that the soul and body aren't enemies but partners, that matter isn't evil but good. He was right that death is a tragedy, not a liberation, that resurrection is necessary, not optional, that the Christian hope isn't escape from materiality but transformation of it. This is actually more biblical than the Platonic alternative. It's more consistent with the incarnation, God becoming flesh, not God merely appearing in flesh. It's more true to the resurrection of Jesus' bodily resurrection, not a spiritual metaphor. Thomas saw something his contemporaries didn't: the dignity of matter, the goodness of embodiment, the integration of body and soul that makes us human. And this connects to modern science in unexpected ways. In the late 20th century, cognitive scientists began developing embodied cognition theory, the idea that thinking isn't just a brain process, but involves the whole body. Your thoughts aren't separate from your physical experiences. The way you move through space shapes how you think about abstractions. The metaphors you use for understanding concepts come from bodily experience. When you think about grasping an idea, you're using physical metaphor. When you see the point, or feel confused, you're mapping bodily sensation onto intellectual understanding. Thinking is embodied. Cognition is extended. Mind is inseparable from body. This is basically what Thomas argued 750 years earlier. The soul works through the body. The intellect needs phantasms. Thought requires embodiment. Modern neuroscience is rediscovering what Thomas knew. You can't separate mind from matter. They're integrated at the deepest level. And if that's true, then death really is a rupture, and resurrection really is necessary. And Thomas was right. But in 1277, none of this is clear. Thomas is dead. His works are condemned. His reputation is in tatters. His enemies have won, or so it seems, because 46 years later, something remarkable happens. In 1323, Thomas Aquinas is declared a saint. The very works that were condemned are now celebrated. The dangerous philosopher becomes the Church's greatest teacher. How did that happen? What changed? That's the final mystery, the culmination of the story, the revelation that makes sense of everything that came before. But first, we need to talk about what happened in Thomas's final days, because there's something he experienced, something he saw or understood that made him stop writing forever. And whatever it was, it changed everything. December 6th, 1273. Naples, Italy. Thomas Aquinas is celebrating Mass in the chapel of San Domenico. He's 48 years old. For decades, he's been writing constantly the Summa Theologica commentaries on Aristotle, theological treatises, philosophical disputations, thousands upon thousands of pages. The Summa alone is mass of a systematic exposition of everything: theology, philosophy, ethics, metaphysics. It's nearly complete. Just a few more sections on the sacraments and the final things, and it will be finished. His masterwork, his life's achievement, the comprehensive synthesis of faith and reason that he's been building toward for 30 years. He's at the altar. The Mass proceeds, and then something happens. We don't know what. The accounts are vague, mysterious. Some say he had a vision. Others say he experienced something ineffable. He doesn't describe it. He can't describe it, or won't. But after that, Thomas Aquinas stops writing forever. His assistant, Reginald of Paperno, is confused, then worried, then desperate. The Summa isn't finished. There's still work to do, important work. They're so close. Reginald begs Thomas to continue. Master, please, you can't stop now. The work is nearly complete. And Thomas says something that has echoed through the centuries. I cannot. Everything I have written seems like straw compared to what I have seen. Straw, worthless, insignificant. All his careful arguments, all his subtle distinctions, all his proofs and clarifications and syntheses, all the intellectual achievement that made him the greatest philosopher-theologian of his age. Straw, what did he see? We don't know. He never explains. He never writes it down. He can barely speak about it. Some contemporaries thought it was a mystical, vijnana, direct experience of God that transcended anything words or concepts could capture. The beatific vision granted temporarily, a glimpse of what awaits after death. Others thought it was a psychological breakdown, the culmination of decades of exhausting intellectual labor, a mind pushed too far, finally shutting down. Still others wondered if he had a stroke or some other medical event that impaired his ability to write. But Thomas himself gives us a clue. He doesn't say, I can't write anymore. He says his writings are straw, inadequate, beside the point, as if he's encountered something so vast, so beyond articulation, that all his previous attempts to put truth into words now seem laughably insufficient. 3 months later, on March 7th, 1274, Thomas Aquinas dies. He's traveling to the Council of Lyon, where the Pope has summoned him. He's weak, exhausted, possibly ill. He stops at a monastery. Fasanovan never leaves. His final days are spent in silence, mostly. He receives the sacraments. He's surrounded by his Dominican brothers. They ask him to comment on the Song of Songs, and he gives a brief lecture from his bed, his last teaching, and then he's gone at 49 years old. One of the greatest minds in human history stops thinking. The man who proved the soul survives death now experiences it himself. The philosopher who mapped the separation of soul and body undergoes that separation. And the Summa Theologico's comprehensive vision of everything remains unfinished, incomplete. Like the separated soul he described, lacking its final fulfillment. The irony is almost too perfect. Thomas spent his life arguing that humans are incomplete without the body, that the separated soul longs for resurrection, that unity is the natural state and separation is tragedy, and he dies leaving his greatest work incomplete, separated from its intended conclusion, longing, in a sense, for the fulfillment it will never receive. The Summa stops mid-sentence, mid-argument, mid-thought, just ... ends. In the middle of discussing penance. It's as if his life and his work mirror each other, both unfinished, both pointing toward a completion that lies beyond this world. But here's what's remarkable. The Summa doesn't need to be finished, not because it's incomplete in some trivial sense. Thomas intended to write more. but because what he did right is sufficient. He solved the soul paradox. He showed how an immaterial intellect can unite with a material body. He proved individual souls are real. He mapped the structure of human psychology, vegetative, sensitive, rational. He explained thinking, willing, choosing, knowing. He threaded the needle between materialism and dualism, between avarism and Platonism, between faith and reason, and he did it so thoroughly, so systematically, so rigorously, that his solution has stood for 750 years. The December 6th experience, whatever it was, didn't invalidate his philosophy. It transcended it. There's a difference. Because here's what I think Thomas realized. He'd spent decades building conceptual structures, carefully defining terms, distinguishing essence from existence, form from matter, intellect from will, creating a philosophical framework so precise, so comprehensive, that every piece fit together perfectly. And it was true. All of it, as far as philosophy can go. He'd gone to the limit. But philosophy has limits. You can prove the soul exists. You can demonstrate its immortality. You can explain how it unites with the body. You can map its powers and operations, but you can't capture the experience of being a soul. You can't put the qualia of consciousness into a syllogism. You can't reduce the mystery of subjective awareness to form and matter. Thomas had described the structure, but on December 6th he encountered the reality. And the reality was so much more than the description that the description suddenly seemed inadequate. Not false, not useless, but partial, limited, straw dot. It's like the difference between reading a book about love and falling in love. The book might be accurate. It might explain the psychology, the biology, the stages of attachment, the neurochemistry of pair bonding. All true, all useful. But when you actually fall in love, you realize the map is not the territory. The description is not the experience. The concept is not the reality. Thomas had drawn the most accurate map of the human soul ever created. And then, for a moment, he stepped off the map into the territory itself. And the territory was infinitely richer than any map could be. But here's the crucial point. The map is still valuable. After Thomas stopped writing, his work didn't disappear. His students preserved it. His Dominican brothers defended it. His ideas spread throughout Europe. Yes, there was controversy. Yes, there were condemnations. But the philosophical rigor, the clarity of thought, the systematic coherencies couldn't be denied. By 1323, 50 years after his death, Thomas Aquinas was declared a saint. The man suspected of heresy became the Church's greatest teacher. By the Council of Trent in the 16th century, the Summa Theologica sat on the altar alongside the Bible, the only book so honored. By the 19th century, Pope Leo XIII declared Thomism the official philosophy of the Catholic Church. Every seminary student had to study Thomas. Every theologian had to reckon with his arguments. And to this day, 750 years later, his solution to the soul paradox remains philosophically vital, because the hard problem of consciousness hasn't gone away. Modern neuroscience can map brain activity. We can see which neurons fire when you think about triangles. We can track the neural correlates of consciousness. We can identify brain regions associated with memory, emotion, decision-making. but we still can't explain how subjective experience arises from objective matter. We can't bridge the explanatory gap between neurons firing and what it's like to be you. This is David Chalmers' hard problem of consciousness. And it's the same problem Thomas was wrestling with. How does matter become mind? How does the physical generate the mental? Thomas answered the soul as form of the body, the intellect as immaterial but embodied. Thinking as requiring both phantasms and abstraction is still one of the most sophisticated solutions ever proposed. It's not the only solution. It's not uncontroversial, but it's still in the conversation, still taken seriously by philosophers, still offering insights that purely materialist or purely dualist approaches miss. And here's why. Thomas understood integration. He didn't try to reduce mind to matter or elevate mind above matter. He didn't make the soul purely physical or purely spiritual. He saw that humans are boundary creatures. We're matter that thinks. We're bodies with souls. We're animals that can grasp eternal truths. We're mortal beings capable of immortality. We stand at the intersection of two worlds, material and immaterial, temporal and eternal, flesh and spirit. And that's not a bug. That's not a compromise. That's not an unstable mixture that needs to be resolved into one side or the other. That's what we are. That's our nature. That's our glory. We're the beings that can study physics and write poetry, that can calculate probabilities and fall in love, that can dissect brains and wonder about consciousness. We're embodied minds, mindful bodies, unified substances that somehow hold together realities that shouldn't be able to coexist. And Thomas showed us how that's possible. So what does this mean for you? Right now, as you watch this, you are performing a miracle. Photons from a screen are hitting your eyes. Chemical reactions are occurring in your retina. Electrical signals are traveling through your optic nerve. Neurons in your visual cortex are firing in patterns. All of that is matter, physical, measurable. But you're not just processing physical signals. You're understanding meaning. You're grasping concepts. You're thinking about the soul paradox itself. That's immaterial, abstract, conceptual, somehow impossibly, mysteriously. Paradoxically, the material process is generating immaterial understanding. Matter is becoming mine. The physical is producing the mental. You are the soul paradox, not as an abstract philosophical problem, but as a living reality. And Thomas's insight is this: you don't need to resolve the paradox by choosing one side. You don't need to reduce yourself to pure matter or pure spirit. You are both, simultaneously, essentially, permanently. You are form and matter united, soul and body integrated, mind and flesh in partnership. You are a unity that shouldn't work, but does. A mystery that can't be fully explained but can be lived. And that's enough, Thomas. Aquinas spent his life trying to explain this mystery. He built the most sophisticated philosophical system in human history. He solved problems that had stumped the greatest minds. He synthesized Aristotle and Christianity, faith and reason, philosophy and theology. And then, on December 6th, 1273, he encountered something beyond all his systems. Something that made all his careful arguments seem like straw. Was it God? Was it a vision of his own soul separated from his body? Was it the direct experience of the immaterial reality he'd spent decades proving must exist? We don't know, but we know this. He didn't recant. He didn't say his work was false. He said it was insufficient, incomplete, partial, like the separated soul longing for the body. Like the map pointing toward territory it can never fully contain. Like words gesturing at realities they can never fully capture. Thomas' philosophy doesn't solve the ultimate mystery. It acknowledges it. It honors it. It provides a framework for thinking about it as clearly as possible. And then it steps back and says, there's more. There's always more. The soul paradox isn't solved. It's transcended. You are not a ghost in a machine. You're not a machine that thinks it's a ghost. You're not a temporary configuration of universal mind. You're not a pure spirit trapped in flesh. You're something stranger and more wonderful than any of those alternatives. You're a rational animal, an embodied soul, a material being capable of immaterial thought, a mortal creature with an immortal destiny. You're a paradox, a mystery, a unity that shouldn't exist but does. And that paradox, that mystery, is what makes you human. Thomas Aquinas saw this more clearly than almost anyone before or since. He mapped the territory as precisely as philosophy can. He solved the problems that can be solved. He proved what can be proven, and then he encountered the mystery beyond proof, the reality beyond argument, the truth that makes all words seem like straw. And he stopped writing, not because he was wrong, but because he was finished. The work he did was sufficient. The solution he found was sound. The map he drew was accurate, but the territory itself, that's not something you can write down. That's something you have to experience. And on March 7th, 1274, Thomas Aquinas did exactly that. He stepped off the map into the territory. He moved from describing the soul to being a separated soul. And wherever he is, now whatever state of existence he occupies, he knows with certainty whether he was right, whether the soul truly is the form of the body, whether the intellect truly survives, whether resurrection truly restores the unity that death ruptures. He knows, and someday you will. Until then, you have his work, his arguments, his solution to the soul paradox. And you have the paradox itself, living, thinking, choosing, wondering, being human, being a mystery, being a soul. That's enough. That has to be enough. Because some mysteries aren't meant to be solved. They're meant to be lived. And the mystery of consciousness, the soul paradox, may be the most important one of all. Not because the answer doesn't matter, but because you are the answer, right now, in this moment. Watching, thinking, understanding. You are the impossible unity, the paradox made flesh, the proof that matter and mind can coexist. Thomas Aquinas spent his life explaining how that's possible, and then he spent his death experiencing it. And now, 750 years later, his words remain. His ideas persist. His solution endures, not a straw. As foundation, as the best map we have for the strangest territory of all, ourselves.